Many believe life as we know it has changed irrevocably, and that in this seismic shift lies an opportunity to turn things around, improve our world, and make life better for the majority, especially in poor countries. It is time to reboot Nigeria. This is Pivotal. It is a new year, but the big issues of 2021 are following us right through into 2022, a pivotal year in Nigeria as the country enters an election season, with national polls scheduled for February 2023. The main issue is which law will govern these elections, since President Muhammadu Buhari has withheld his assent to the new electoral bill forwarded to him by the National Assembly. The president, in the notice of rejection he sent to legislators, says it is undemocratic for direct primaries to be imposed on political parties. He also cited the huge spending required to run direct primary elections. But critics of the president, including the senior advocate of Nigeria, Femi Falana, have dismissed the president's reasons for rejecting the bill, saying Section 87 of the Electoral Act makes provision for direct and indirect primaries, while also pointing out that the president has himself benefited from direct primaries in the past. But in addition to this issue of direct primaries, there are also improvements that the bill would have introduced to the process of elections, like electronic transfer of results and a whole bunch of other things, all of which now also stand as rejected. To discuss the implication of the president's decision for envisaged reforms of the electoral system ahead of elections in 2023, I'm joined by Mr. Samson Itodu, the director of the Youth Initiative for Advocacy, Growth and Advancement, YAGA, a civil society organization advocating for better governance. Also joining us for this conversation is Mr. Festus Okoye, the spokesman of the Electoral Umpire in Nigeria, Inec. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on Pivotal.
Thank you so much.
Let me start with you, Mr. Itodo, by asking you, what is your response to the decision by the president to reject the amended electoral law as sent to him by the National Assembly?
Well, thank you very much, Kedera, and compliments of the season. Well, it's just a testament that what we're grappling with is policy capture. We have a process that began on a high note. But it appears that, yes, politics seem to have influenced the entire process. And it does appear that the actors who are driving this are not guided by public interest, because if they are guided by public interest, they would know that as at the point the president declined assent, we were just about 425 days to the 2023 elections. You've got FCT municipal area council elections in February. You have the primaries for the Ekiti governorship elections starting on January 4th. So we've lost the time and the opportunity for Inec to test run some of the innovations that it's introduced to the electoral process.
Mr. Okoye, how disappointed is Inec at the decision of the president, or does Inec not have a position one way or the other regarding what has happened?
We have a position. We are only disappointed that one single item in the entire legal framework was allowed to overshadow the bigger issues and the bigger achievements and the bigger progressive provisions that were made within the framework of the law. So to that particular extent, we are disappointed. But as an electoral management body, we recognize the fact that the National Assembly has been vested vested with the legislative powers of the Federation. And also the President has been also been given the power to assent to a particular bill or to withhold his assent. For the Commission, what is important at this point in time is that there's an electoral legal framework that is still extant, that is still in place, and we'll continue to use that particular electoral legal framework to operate and carry out our processes and our procedures.
Inec is sort of being a party to the conversation around putting the bill together and eventually sending it to the President for his assent. Are you able to give us any insights into the sort of conversation that is now taking place, seeing as the bill in its entirety has been rejected by the President? What is going on in Abuja? What are the conversations that are taking place, perhaps behind closed doors? Anything you can share?
Well, I'm not a member of the National Assembly and I'm not in the presidency, so I'm not in a position to know what is going on behind the closed doors.
I am sure you know a few things, Mr. Okoye. Just share the things you know.
What is significant is that if you look at the President's reasons for the rejection, the reasons are anchored and predicated on only one single issue, and that is the issue of the mode of primaries. The President did not mention any of the other progressive provisions that have been imputed into the new electoral legal framework or the ones that have been removed. So if you look at the entire electoral legal framework, you will see that there are at least 10 significant amendments that have been made to the electoral legal framework. And we believe that some of these amendments will enhance the credibility of our elections, will give the Commission financial additional financial independence, and also give the Commission the added muscle to deal with some electoral infractions. So to that particular extent, we are disappointed.
Now, Mr. Itodo, alongside other civil society organizations, you are, of course, doing a lot of advocacy work around governance, with elections also being part of some of the reforms that you're pushing for. So can I ask you what the conversation is within civil society groups about what should happen next? What is civil society doing to try and see if they can find a way to salvage the electoral bill, given the rejection that we've seen from the President?
The National Assembly has two options. The first is to override the President's veto. The fundamental question is, can the National Assembly and the current 9th National Assembly veto the President? Do they have the required number, the two-thirds majority, to veto the President? That's a question for determination, but that's an option, and we've emphasized and placed that option before the legislators. The second option is for the National Assembly to remove, the contentious clause, and in this case, is the National Assembly retaining the provision of the current Electoral Act, where parties are accorded the latitude to determine the mode of selection of candidates, whether direct or indirect, and then retransmit the bill back to the President for assent. But before they do that, they need to address some drafting errors and cross-referencing gaps which civil society have identified. Civil society groups submitted a memo to the National Assembly highlighting gaps and drafting errors in 11 sections of the bill. For instance, in section 50 sub 2 of the electoral bill, there is a section that refers to subsection 63. Now, section 50 sub 2 deals with the procedure for voting, open secret ballot, open secret voting. And then it says that subject to section 63 of the Act. Now, section 63 of the Act has no connection with section 50 sub 2. It's incorrect for the National Assembly to make reference to that particular legislation. I think the positions are varied. There's a school of thought that believes that, one, we shouldn't engage in over-legislation, that the issues relating to the mode of candidate nomination should be left for the parties to decide. And so they are of the view that direct or indirect primaries the parties should determine the procedure, and the law shouldn't make that strict prescription. Now, the other school of thought believe that if you restrict parties to direct primaries, it will open up the space for participation. And the issue, and people around the president have been quoted to say that the president supports direct primaries. However, it appears the interest of the governors took precedence over overall national interests, and that's really disturbing. The truth is, Kaideria, whether direct or indirect primaries, none of these modes is insulated from manipulation.
Mr. Okoye, in real terms, how much more money would it cost INEC to actually help parties run direct primaries? Is it a substantial increase in terms of the sort of deployment that you have to do? We know the parties have to pay for the primaries, like Mr. Etodo say, but there's a role that INEC plays. How much more money are we talking about?
Basically and fundamentally, as has been pointed out, the conduct of party primaries, be it nomination, be it Congress, be it convention, is within the exclusive domestic realm of the political parties. And the commission has nothing to do with it. It is the responsibility of the political parties, if they want to use ballot papers, to print their ballot papers, if they want to use ballot boxes, to go and procure their ballot boxes, if they want to rent a venue, to go and rent a venue, if they want security, to go and get security. Our responsibility is to monitor these primaries.
And the question I'm asking is whether you're able to put a number on the cost of monitoring direct primaries and monitoring indirect primaries, and if it is true that one is slightly more expensive than the other. This is just so that when people are having the conversation, they're having an informed conversation about these costs.
One, as of today, we have 18 registered political parties. It is not mandatory for a political party to sponsor candidates for an election. So one of the political parties may decide not to sponsor any candidate for presidential election, governorship election, or even state and national assembly elections. So to that particular extent, no cost will be incurred. Secondly, if you look at the new amendment that was made, the National Assembly said that within a period of 2 weeks, a political party should forward to the Independent National Electoral Commission guidelines on the type of direct primaries he wants to conduct. So there's a possibility that a political party may decide to use the 8,809 electoral wards of the commission to conduct these primaries. They may also decide to only use the 774 local governments to conduct their primaries. They may just decide to conduct their primaries within the state capital, in which case we
Mr. Okoye, it sounds like what you want to tell me is that you cannot give me a cost.
we cannot put a cost
that,
to it.
it's very difficult. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we focus on how the Electoral Act can be salvaged, if indeed it can be saved, and which other elements within it are critical for elections in 2023. Don't go away. Welcome back to Pivotal. I'm talking to Mr. Samson Itodo and Mr. Festus Okoye about the rejection of the new electoral bill by President Muhammadu Buhari and what implications this has for the elections in 2023. Now, before the break, Samson, you had pointed out some of the issues with the way the National Assembly, for example, drafted the bill with mistakes. But the other part of the issue for many people is that there are a lot of other reforms that this bill is supposed to bring in, like electronic transfer of results, like the fact that there are special seats, in the National Assembly put aside for women to encourage some sort of gender equity and gender representation, a whole myriad of other reforms. And it looks like as if the president, in sort of rejecting the bill, has also rejected those issues. How significant, in your view, what are those reforms in improving the quality of elections and the electoral process in 2023?
Well, the truth is, it's sad that we've reduced the conversation on the electoral bill to just two amendments, and that's electronic transmission and the mode of nomination of candidates. This bill is a new bill. And it would radically transform our electoral process. And I'll highlight three issues. One, that the bill contains provisions that will enhance INEC's financial independence. In the 2019 elections, the budget for the elections was about 184 or 189 billion. 60% or 65% of the funding only got to INEC about 6 months to the elections. And the other 45% got to INEC in November of 2018. That's 60 days to the elections. One way to undermine the Electoral Commission is to starve the Commission of funding. And so what this bill tries to do is to cure their mischief by making provisions that the state and the government must release funding for INEC's funding for general elections 1 year before the election. So that's one significant amendment.
Well, I mean, for a fact now, that's not going to happen, is it? I mean, we are now in January, elections are in February 2023.
The other issue was around electronic accreditation of voters. The bill legitimizes, this new fantastic technology INEC has deployed, the BVAS machines for voter accreditation, because the Supreme Court held, in Peter Side and Wike's case, in the Akwa Ibom case, that in determining overvoting, we need to look at the total number of votes cast versus, the accredited voters. But the current law is the total number of votes cast versus the number of registered voters. So this bill addresses, it legitimizes electronic accreditation, but also reviews the definition of overvoting. One other fantastic provision in the bill was around the power of INEC to review results declared under duress. You recall that in 2019, there are legislators who are currently in the National Assembly who compelled returning officers to declare them winners at gunpoint. Even when INEC delayed issuance of certificate of return, they went and procured judgments in court that compelled INEC to issue them certificate of return. What this bill tends to do is, if this bill is assented into law, in any election where INEC or INEC officials are compelled to declare results under duress, or results are declared in contravention of election guidelines, INEC will have power to review those results. So these are amendments within the Electoral Act. It cures, this lacuna in the law where in the Kogi case where a candidate died after polls had commenced, but a winner had not been returned. In this case, the bill cures that lacuna. So there are lofty amendments in this bill.
Mr. Okoye, let me ask you to comment specifically on one of the things that Mr. Itodo raised, the issue of budget and the time when you get money released and all of that. How much of a challenge has that been in past elections in terms of, your ability to conduct elections, shall we say, properly?
Well, the issue of funding has been a very, very huge challenge, especially in terms of the release of funds to the electoral management body to conduct its activities. For instance, on the issue of the bimodal voter accreditation system that Samson alluded to, these things, despite the fact that we developed it within the commission, but these things are fabricated outside the country, and you need at least 1 year to prepare to get them in. So if you don't have sufficient funding early enough, there is no way you can continue with it. The same thing with the issue of voters registration and acquiring some other gadgets, renovating our offices, getting them ready for elections, and also doing some other things. So if funds are released to the commission at least a year to the election, it will assist tremendously in our planning, and we can get a lot of things right before the elections, and also procure a lot of the things we intend to procure before the election. So we're excited at that particular possibility, and it will make our planning much more seamless.
How hopeful are you that we can reach some sort of compromise and that the National Assembly will either make an adjustment and send the bill back to Mr. President, or, wield their veto power?
I'm hopeful that both the National Assembly and the presidency will act in the national interest, look at the overall national interest in coming to a decision or coming to a conclusion in relation to this particular matter. Because as Samson pointed out, there are lofty provisions in the amended electoral bill. He talked about some. We also have the issues around the disruption of elections when election had already started, the conferring of specific jurisdiction on the Federal High Court relating to pre-election matters, the issue of inspection of logos of political parties way ahead of the election. So there are so many provisions in the new electoral legal framework that will aid the electoral process. And if you also look at the issue of the adjustment of the timelines, enabling political parties to conduct their primaries on time, and also enabling the electoral management body to display the personal particulars of candidates so that people will conclude all their pre-election legislation before the election. So I think that both parties will act in the national interest and get our electoral process back on track.
Mr. Itodo, the same question to you. How hopeful are you that this can be resolved? And as a civil society leader, what is your advice to regular Nigerians who perhaps are listening to this and is piquing their interest and they're realizing that perhaps they need to get involved? What can people do?
Am I hopeful? I am very hopeful, and I'm hopeful that the actors in this case, the National Assembly and the President, will act in national interest. And national interest in this case will be that by January 31st, Nigeria should have a new electoral law, because it will enhance the quality of future elections. For me, that was national interest. And so the National Assembly should retransmit that bill to the president. And the president, having gone through the bill, we don't expect him to wait for another 30 days. He should assent to the bill within 1 week, except if they're going to trade public interest with their private and partisan interests. What should Nigerians do? I think Nigerians need to call on their legislators, ask the National Assembly to review its resumption dates in the interest of the nation, because this bill is critical, to our democracy. Because we are in a national election emergency. By January, we're already in the election year.
And I'm afraid, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Mr. Samson Itodo, the Director of Youth Initiative for Advocacy, Growth and Advancement, YAGA, a civil society organization that advocates for better governance, and also Mr. Festus Okoye, the spokesman of the Electoral Umpire in Nigeria, Inec.
Thank you so much.
That's it on this edition of Pivotal. Wishing everyone a happy new year.